Hi everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Interconnection webinar series. Sorry for the problem that just occurred, but it's not a problem actually. It's a good way to introduce you to the interpretation, because you can press the button interpretation if you need an interpretation in French, in Spanish, or in Portuguese. Anyway, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are located. Shalom. My name is Julian, and I am a business and political journalist living and working in Brussels for various media outlets. I am also the translator into French of the Italian Jewish poet Franco Fortini, whose latest book will be published in April this year by Les Belles Lettres Paris. It's great to have so many of you joining us from around the world. Hello, and it's great to have interpreters with us. Merci, interpreters. Gracias. Obrigado. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Interconnection webinar series is an initiative spearheaded by our Young Leadership Division ahead of the coronavirus crisis. A year ago, we set out to create a webinar series that would connect young leadership from all over the world with engaging content from Israel's leading policymakers and researchers. Now, unfortunately, many of us are still working and doing everything from home. But it's great that this initiative has continued with such momentum for a year now. I am thrilled to have you joining us for today's lecture, as it is incredibly, this lecture is incredibly, let's say, timely and important as well, So we have the honor of being joined by Professor Eugene Kandel, the CEO of Startup Nation Central. Now, between 2009 and 2015, Professor Kandel served at the head of the National Economic Council of the Prime Minister's Office, and as economic advisor to the Prime Minister, playing then a central role in all major economic policy decisions. Professor Kandel is the Emil Spire Professor of Economics and Finance at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He holds a BA and an MA from the Hebrew University and an MBA and a PhD from the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago. Professor Kandel, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. It's a pleasure, it's an honor. The floor, let's say the screen, is yours before addressing the absence of a budget in Israel and economic issues in Israel, which is crucial, actually. Can we maybe first explain what Startup Central is actually?
Thank you, Julian. Let me put this few slides. I'm going to try not to bore you with too many slides. Good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of the day that you are at. I'm very honored to be here with this great organization. We've collaborated, when I was in the government, we've collaborated with Karen Isod quite a lot, and still have very fond memories of establishing all kinds of programs with you. So Startup Nation Central is an 8-year-old organization. It's a nonprofit that was founded based on a philanthropist from New York reading the book Startup Nation and deciding that this is an exciting part of the Israeli economy, and he would like to actually help support it through his philanthropic activity. And his team joined him. One of the people on the team is actually one of the co-authors of this book, Dan Senor, And so it was founded in the early 2013. I joined in 2015 after leaving the government. This is quite an unusual organization because what it does, it tries to help Israeli economy and making Israel more sustainable through direct impact on Israeli economy, but also direct impact on Israel's positioning in the world through the very, very narrow prism of technological innovation ecosystem. So we basically do three things. We connect the innovation, Israeli technological innovation, to the world through the business lens, but also through the impact lens. We empower Israeli innovation ecosystem in Israel to make it more sustainable through a very wide variety of activities, from policy strategy, human capital development, community development, etc. And we do significant data collection, research, and disseminate these insights and this information to everyone. So one of our products is something that you can all look at. It's free. It's very user-friendly. It's called Startup Nation Finder. It basically takes the entire ecosystem and puts it under one roof. So you can see that there are over 6,500 companies, almost 600 investors, all kinds of incubators, accelerators, etc., 370 multinationals, and a lot of academic technologies that are ready to be scaled. So everything is interconnected, easily searchable, and easily connectable to. So this is something that we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years, and we have about 110,000 visits per month, more than almost half of them from abroad. We even started giving this away to other countries and basically helping them connect their own ecosystem. So this platform, under the brand of Global Finder Network, exists in New Zealand, in Thailand, in Taiwan, in Michigan, in Texas, and we are moving to Africa and to South America in the next couple of months. So this is something that can be scaled. It's an ecosystem with a hub in Israel. So this is what we do. And we're happy to help you. If you're interested in connecting to Israeli innovation, please talk to us, look it up, and we will be happy to discuss it with you on how we can help. By the way, we're completely we never charge for our services. We don't take money from the government. We're 100% philanthropically funded, so we have no financial interest in anything we do. So you might have heard in the recent weeks that the Israeli economy shrunk by only 2.4% during Corona, which is quite below the anticipated rate of over 5%. If we were talking 3 months ago, I would have suggested that 5% would be about the right number. So this was a pleasant surprise. But I want to claim that Israel doesn't really have an economy. It actually has two economies. More than any country in the world, it has two economies, and they are very, very separate. And to illustrate these differences, I've coined the term Zeppelin Economy about 5 years ago, and today it's used by many people to articulate this feature, this unique feature of Israeli economy. Let me explain what it means. So Zeppelin Economy means that in basically any aspect of what these two economies do and need, they're very, very different. They need different talent. They have different markets. They have different attitudes. They need different financing. They need different regulation. They need different taxation policies. They are very, very different. But the reason that I've chosen a Zeppelin image is that the Zeppelin economy, which is the high-tech or technological innovation economy, is highly movable as opposed to the main economy. So let me give you some numbers. The Zeppelin economy, why do we think that Israel, more than, let's say, US or any other country has two economies. It's for the simple reason that Israel has the largest part of its economy, both in terms of people employed and in terms of GDP, involved in this Zeppelin. Over 9% of the workforce is employed in the Zeppelin, and it generates close to 15% of GDP. US, which is undisputed world leader in technology development, these numbers doesn't get even close to these numbers in relative terms, of course. I mean, in absolute terms, US is much, much bigger than Israeli tech economy. But in relative terms, Israel is number one in almost any parameter. I'll talk about this a little bit later. So the main economy has suffered greatly under Corona, and the reason is that it's mostly domestic economy. It is less than half in terms of productivity on hourly productivity relative to the Zeppelin economy, less than half. So these are very, very different. It's very local, and it's actually heavily regulated and very much dependent on the government in the following sense. I always give this example. If a company, I'm trying to keep track of time. If a company in the main economy goes bankrupt, it's all over the news and everybody's screaming, why did the government allow this to happen? If a company in the Zeppelin economy goes bankrupt with the same number of people, it basically never gets to the news because these people find a job within 3 weeks and that's the end of it. So these are very, very different economies. And so the main economy suffered greatly because a lot of people employed in this economy in sectors that have been hit very hard, whether it's travel, food, entertainment, airlines, tourism, and the related supply industries. Lots of young people, lots of lower paid, unskilled workers in that field. And so when they get fired or furloughed, the employment suffers much more than the GDP. The additional problem that why don't these people get reallocated to other areas of other sectors of the economy? Here we had some political issues because the furlough that was imposed in the very early stage exactly a year ago, so that people could go on unemployment without being fired, actually became a pretty attractive thing for many people. So I lose 20% of my wage and I don't have to go to work. I mean, that sounds pretty cool. And so a lot of people basically get hooked after a year to this state of the world. And so this was a mistake and should have been changed already maybe after 2-3 months. But unfortunately, Israel, as you know, is undergoing in 2 weeks its 4th election in 2 years. And so political instability prevented more coherent, effective, but less popular measure to be undertaken. Just to give you an example, you still don't have a budget. The last time the government approved the budget was in 2017, okay, which is almost 4 years ago. So the main economy is in trouble. On the other hand, and there is a particular challenge of having two economies. The question is, how do you grow each economy while maintaining one society? Because they are very, very different, but we still live in one country, and we have to figure out how do we maintain these two economies without alienating each other and driving each other nuts. So one thing that we continuously try to argue to the government is that to grow fast, each economy needs different regulation and taxation. And so the government needs to clearly set different standards and different regulatory environment for these two economies, because in one economy, they're competing with the rest of the world, and in the other one, they're not. The other issue that is challenging is increase in inequality, which is inherent in the system. Not only the Zeppelin economy is twice more productive, the difference is growing. So the Zeppelin economy is growing faster on a per capita basis than the rest of the economy. And so that creates growing inequality, which is hard to tolerate in Israel. And so that is something that we need to figure out. And the only way to figure out how to deal with that is by actually bringing more and more people into this economy and bringing the tech, not only into people into tech, but also tech into people's lives, making our government, our municipalities, our services, etc., much more efficient. So now we move, sorry, go ahead.
No, because we understood that the Zeppelin economy is really movable. But I just wanted to ask you something about the point you made just before. What are the consequences of a no budget in Israel? I mean, the point I'd like very much you to make is, does it freeze the economy?
Well, no, unlike the United States, there's no freeze out of the activity. Actually, in Israel, what happens is that the economy goes into 1/12 budget. So instead of the budget department goes to the accountant general, and basically every expense of the government becomes audited by the accountant general, and the total budget is 1/12 of the original budget, the one that was passed in 2017. So that basically does not allow any long-term planning, because you cannot commit to anything. It's basically a nightmare for everyone, including a lot of NGOs that work with the government, as well as a lot of companies that built on government contracts and built on government regulation and built on various programs that were supposed to be funded. So that's the danger. On the other hand, the government, without a budget, passes all kinds of special budgets to basically give money away to the people to offset their hardship in some smart ways, some less smart ways. And that is basically has no limit. And so you, on the one hand, have unlimited spending. On the other hand, you have a complete lack of planning ability. So that's a really, really bad combination. So let me move to the tech economy. So there are various features that are quite unique to Israel. First of all, it's deep tech driven. We're not particularly good in making sort of light apps. It's much more deep tech driven because it comes from a deep tech environment in the military and the universities. It is much more startup based than larger companies, although it's starting to change. And it's much more B2B focused, so business to business focused than most of other ecosystems. For example, California ecosystems, Silicon Valley is much more B2C, business to customer. In Israel, because we're far from the market, it's much easier to deal with the business to business environment. So there are 4 core competencies in Israel. So software, data, and AI, both universities, but mainly the military, generate huge amount of talent as well as technology in that space. Sensors, robotics, and drones, again, this is mostly military and the associated industry. Life sciences is mostly universities and research centers as well as hospitals. And then plant, water, and soil sciences, it's universities and Vulcani Institute, which many of you may know. So if you take these 4 core competencies and you connect them, you get all kinds of innovative clusters. So for example, software, data, and AI create cybersecurity, which of course is also driven by the demand because Israel is one of the most attacked countries in the world, if not the most attacked. The same one creates fintech, even though Israel does not need such an extensive fintech industry. It turns out that these core competencies are perfect for developing fintech industry. If you combine software with sensors, robotics, and drones, you get Industry 4.0, even though it's advanced manufacturing, even though Israel doesn't really have big industry, and smart mobility, even though Israel doesn't really have automotive producers. 10 years ago, when I started in the Prime Minister office and established the fuel alternatives, which together, by the way, with Karen Isod, there were basically no companies in smart mobility or fuel alternatives. Today, as you see, there are 520 companies, and basically every car manufacturer and tier one supplier are present in Israel, either in investments, in R&D centers, in another way. Similarly, combine life sciences, sensors, and data, and you get digital health, medical devices, and biotech. Combine plant, water, soil, and sciences with sensors and software, and you get incredible second wave of precision agriculture, which is now conquering the world. Israel is considered one of the pioneers in that space, and companies are gaining prominence all over the world. So this is the space, and in that space, you can see how it evolved over the last 2 decades. Okay, you can see it in 2 ways. And I'm deliberately put it on until 2019, so it's still the sort of the normal world. You can see that in 2000, there were 50 R&D centers of multinationals, large multinationals companies in Israel. Today, there are almost 400. It dropped a little bit during Corona, but we're still in 370s range. So these are, all of these came in the last decade and a half because they understand that Israel has a lot of human capital and a lot of companies that can be acquired. This has been, for a while, it's been a blessing, but after a while it became a problematic issue because we now almost half of all people who are generating technology working for multinational companies. So everything needs to be done in moderation. Looking at VC investments, these are out-of-pocket investments into Israeli companies. You can see that there was a basically stagnation between $1 and $2 billion until about 2012. And then it basically took off. And in 2019, there were almost $9 billion invested in Israeli tech. Most of this increase was due to maturity of Israeli companies, and so later and later mega rounds were accounted for that. And then came Corona. So initial fears, and we were very vocal around that, is that we thought the VC funding will evaporate, given that 85% of Israeli VC funding comes from abroad. Now, there was a standard operating procedure that VC investors do not invest long distance. You have to look into people's eyes before investing. Luckily, I'm happy to announce that we were completely wrong. There were 3 pieces of good news that made us wrong. First of all, there was very high demand for tech. Corona broke multiple barriers, many psychological, many operational, that said that you now can do education long distance, work long distance, health long distance. We are now routinely attending weddings and funerals long distance. I mean, everything, all of that requires technology. So you can see by valuations of traded companies, the tech prices and valuations through the roof. The high demand for Israeli tech was specific to sectors that we're good at. So cyber is very important. Digital health is very important. AI is very important. Big data is very important. So Israeli tech, and I'm happy to announce that even though 2019 was a record year, 2020 increased VC funding by 25% relative to 2019. Our growth rate in terms of funding was the highest in the world. It was quite amazing. We went over $10 billion in this year, and the first 2 months of 2021 promised to be even better, because just in the first 2 months, we've already seen $2.6 billion of investment. And the last part was the newfound ability by VC investors to invest remotely. It was another psychological barrier gone. And so suddenly they were investing through Zoom like there's no tomorrow. So we had record financing year, but for many companies was also record sales year. So we now see companies' valuations, their companies are going public or going SPACs on NYC and NASDAQ at valuations of several $billion, companies that were only valued at less than $1 billion a year ago. So that has been, and the reason is again, the demand for technology. So this industry, or this sector, this Zeppelin economy, unlike the main economy, is coming out of the crisis strong, which also amplifies inequality because all of these people are sitting at home and working. I mean, we've worked, we never closed the shop. We worked throughout. We've probably been to the office maybe a month and a half in the last year. So that creates even bigger inequality, and we need to address that. This is the reason that at Startup Nation Central came up with a renewed call for a new social contract between the tech ecosystem and the rest of Israeli society. This is a very important point that I cannot under stress. And the last thing is interesting is that at the very beginning, about a year ago, we said, well, Corona is an interesting thing. Let's look through our database, the Finder that I was talking about, and see how many companies are relevant for fighting Corona. In March, we found about 60 companies. It turned out that by July, August, there were over 200 companies in Israel that were utilizing tech to fight Corona. Many of them were doing incredible job around the world. So in remote monitoring and home care was, for example, Early Sense is a company that has been doing extremely well. Cytocare is another one. Protection, diagnostics and decision support. For example, this company, EDAS, can basically distinguish what type of virus or bacteria you don't have just by knowing where you live and having access to the data in your neighborhood from the labs. A variety of companies, K-Health is now valued at several $billion and is coming for the last round of investment. Site Diagnostics, you all remember that lady that was promising to do full blood count, whose company was, I forget her name, whose company was valued at several $1 billion, and then it turned out to be fraud. Site Diagnostic actually did that and has an FDA approval for that process and is now valued over close to $1 billion or over $1 billion. So all of these companies have pivoted. Some of them pivoted their technologies, some of them created new technologies. And so if you want to go and look for COVID-related companies, you can go on our Finder and just write coronavirus, and you will get a full list of those companies. You can maintain your own list. It's quite an easy way to do it. So basically, what I wanted to finish with is that we had good part of the economy was very, very robust. This explains why the economy shrunk only by 2.4% and not by 5 or more. At the same time, the unemployment is still high, very high. And there are some structural issues that we have to figure out how to do. But, you know, we're open for that. And the last thing I want to reiterate that we would be very, very happy to work with any of you who is interested in connecting either personally or by connecting large corporates in your countries or governments in your countries who are interested in learning more about this, whether about technologies that they can deploy, whether about creating their own ecosystems. We are definitely open for business. Thank you very much.
Professor Kendall, thank you very much for that incredibly insightful speech. So I just wanted to say that there is a chat button, a Q&A button, and so the audience can ask questions. We will be pleased to ask those questions. I've got maybe a first question for you, Professor Kendall. You made a point just before about inequalities and social matters. What does Israeli Tech and Startup Nation Central in terms of, let's say, impact of UN SDGs?
Okay, so there I would split the answer into 2 points. One point, and they're driven by different considerations or different reasoning. So one point that I mentioned is that the average Israeli citizen today does not see the benefits of having this entire incredibly dense innovation sector in his neighborhood. In fact, sometimes it's really annoying because these people are constantly being profiled in the newspapers as extremely successful, selling companies for hundreds of millions of billions of dollars. They are considered, there are articles about how spoiled their workers are and how they're getting massages and all kinds of fancy food and entertainment, etc. And so the average citizen says, why do I need to give them various favorite tax treatments, etc.? They're rich, they spoiled. What's the story? And so there we have to create an environment in which this does not translate into political pressure to stop, for Israel to stop being competitive as a home for these for this sector, because this sector, like I said, is very mobile, and many countries would pay a lot of money to have it move, to pieces of it move to their domains, and actually many of them are already trying to. So that part is different. So there, what we're trying to do is to connect the social needs and the government efficiency, municipal efficiency, local industry efficiency, so that the average citizen will see that the services that they get because of technology are much better, that the wages they get paid are much higher, etc. Then there is a different story about sort of the world. It turns out that Israel, we mapped the ecosystem and found many companies whose products and technologies are very relevant for achieving SDG goals. Now, Israel is a small country, so it cannot do big impact because it just has a very small population, very small market. We can all stop using fuels completely. We're still not going to make a dent in the climate issue. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying, but I'm just saying that in terms of the impact, it will be negligible. But where we can make a huge impact is by deploying technologies that we do have and do develop and make them count on the impact stage. And this is something that Startup Nation Central has been actively doing in several regions in the world, in Asia, in India. We're starting in Africa, and we're working with the Inter-American Development Bank to introduce Israeli impact technologies in Latin America and Caribbean. So these are the two areas where I think we can be: sustainability, small farmers, access to small farmers, improving food security, improving sustainability of agriculture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I've got a question from Nira Vorkman. Thank you very much, Nira. What about the development of vaccines? How is it going? In the beginning of the pandemic, one Israeli company said it was almost there. What is the status now? Do you know something about this?
Yes, thank you, Nira. I think we've met. My last trip to outside of Israel was to Brazil, and I think that's where we met, if I'm not mistaken. So there were actually two vaccines that are being developed in Israel right now. One is called Migvax, the company. It comes from Migal Institute in the north of Israel. They actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, they had a fully functioning vaccine against corona, except that it was aimed at poultry rather than people. And so chickens were safe from corona, but people weren't. And so that company decided to try to catch up. Well, it took longer than they thought to move from chickens to people, but they're still doing it. There is, I understand that they're now doing a round of investments. The second organization that's been doing this was a Biological Institute. This is an institute of the Israeli government that in usual times works on prevention of biological attacks and how to deal with them. Not particularly pleasant thought, but they actually have incredible expertise in all of these things. And so they developed a vaccine, which is now being tested in Hadassah Hospital and maybe in other hospitals as well. I don't really know how it works. Unfortunately, I'm just an economist, but apparently, you know, Hadassah is pretty excited about this. So that's the status of vaccines as far as I know about.
Thank you very much. A second question from Dan. Do you envisage generic or project-related collaborations? It's about Startup Nation Central, obviously. How should one apply for your services? Is the second question in this second question.
Okay, so what we do is we basically work with very large corporates. We work with everybody through Finder. So Finder is a self-sustaining platform that allows you to identify technologies and connect to the companies on the platform, create lists that will follow you, you'll get push notifications. This is basically a working tool, and it's going to get an upgrade, a significant upgrade in the next couple of months. So for large corporates, governments and large NGOs, so the big somebody who brings big problems that can be, if solved, can generate a big impact. What we do is we create something that we call an engagement. Okay, before the corona, we would basically work with the organization and try to understand its challenges and its what it tries to accomplish, and create a very customized and tailored solutions. And then the senior management of organization would come to Israel, and we would spend 2, 3, 4 days, basically breakfast to dinner, all included, all work, exposing you to the exact companies, people, technologies, government, academia, peers, etc., that would explain, and as well as explaining how you can connect to this ecosystem. We actually written an extensive report together with PwC on how multinationals can connect to Israeli innovation in a variety of forms. So this is now to what we do today is we created a sequence of events. We usually create also a similar first steps of business development, trying to figure out what are the challenges and how we can address them. Usually that follows by a webinar or a Zoom with a few relevant people where we explain sort of what is it that is happening here and how we can help. And then if there is interest, and from both sides, because we are usually pretty well booked, so we're looking for really large opportunities for the Israeli ecosystem and for making impact. And then we create either online engagement or face-to-face engagement, just like I explained before. There's a variety of ways for us to do it, and our biz dev team is extremely well prepared to address very, very wide variety of situations in which we can help.
I have a very broad and timely question. Israel slowly reopens its coronavirus-closed economy after 3 lockdowns. Are you confident?
Am I confident that we're going to have another lockdown? No.
No, about the economy and the well-being of
Yeah,
the
no,
economy.
I think that the economy, there is a reasonably high probability that we're going to have another round before herd immunity is achieved, even though Israel is now around 55 or close to 60% of population that had at least 1 shot, and almost 40% of the population that had 2 shots. So by far the furthest in the world, but it's still not enough to get herd immunity. So the health issues will dominate the economy. If the health issues are not, there's no eruption of infections and there's no new variant, I'm pretty sure that Israeli economy, or both of the Israeli economy, actually well, the traditional, the main Israeli economy will rebound because there's a huge pent-up demand. Yesterday, I was driving to the north with my daughter to go for a trek, and there was a huge traffic jam going that way and back. People are just very, very eager to go and resume their lives, and since they can't go abroad, much more demand will be focused on Israel. So much more sort of these hospitality systems, etc. All those systems that have been locked for a long time. The effect of the furlough, as I mentioned, will need to be removed forcefully because it's not popular. So I don't believe that it will happen before the elections. But after the elections, it has to happen because it has very damaging effect. Overall, the predictions are between 4.5% and 5+% growth rate in 2021, which is not going to cover the losses of last year, of course, but it's going to get pretty close.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got maybe a last question about the UAE. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, are new friends officially. When you do business, you get to know each other in the flow of investments coming into the UAE from Israel, for example, these days. What are we learning about the cultural differences between these two neighbors?
Well, let me tell you the following. I mean, I don't want to travel, and I was very hesitant, but I couldn't pass this opportunity. So I went with the first delegation to Dubai in September. So on the day when the Abraham Accord was signed on the lawn of the White House, I was actually in Dubai, and we were talking to ministers and high-ranking officials as well as businessmen. I was very, very surprised. I mean, I was, you're going to a country that never had diplomatic relations. You're starting basically today from nothing. We've seen peace agreements between Egypt and Jordan and Israel. It wasn't, I've been to Jordan negotiating around gas exports quite a few times. They're courteous, they nice to you, but there's no warmth in there. What I found is something quite astounding. First of all, I found people of very, very high caliber, very high caliber. I mean, it was like, wow. There were, many of them were, most of them actually were Western educated, high degrees in top schools, very, very pragmatic, and they truly wanted to get to know us. I mean, this was very interesting. It was not politeness. It was not, I mean, they were very polite, of course, but it was clear that they were doing business with Israelis behind the scenes for the last 15 years. And so, unlike in Egypt and Jordan, where the peace started and then economy didn't follow, here the economy started and then peace followed 15 years later, and now they really want to be engaged. And so what they wanted it seemed to us, is that what they wanted are quite a few things from connection to Israel. One of them, they have their strategic plan. They're very, very strategic and programmed. So they wanted as much technology that can help them to achieve their strategic plan as possible. And so they're very much interested in getting that. The newly appointed ambassador of UAE, whom I'm supposed to meet like in 10 days, already put a target of very high number of Israeli and UAE Emirati companies that he expects to see doing business. I mean, that's his personal target to achieve. That's incredibly impressive. The second thing that they are interested in is they want Israel's help to advance their evolving innovation ecosystem. Their innovation ecosystem is the largest in the Middle East after Israel, but it's orders of magnitude smaller than Israeli one. And so they want to be in technology. They are already in fintech quite significantly. They started moving into space. They want to have a very high level of technological achievements in leadership, in order to have something to go on after the oil runs out. So this is the first and the only country in the world that has the Minister for AI. I interviewed him for our conference, and this was quite amazing, because he said, look, it was just that there was no minister for energy or electricity when the electricity just started. It was a mistake, because if they were better organized, they could have figured out that you don't need 10 electric lines running in parallel. You can do it in one, and so the whole system would have developed much faster. So we're trying not to make the same mistake with AI. Now, interestingly, if you look at AI, it's very clear how complementary Israel and UAE are. If you take world rankings on AI economies, Israel is about number 12, UAE is in 20s somewhere, but there are 6 or 7 parameters. In 3 of these parameters, Israel is in top 3 or top 5. In another 3 of these parameters, UAE in top 3 or top 5. But these are not the same. So if we take UAE and Israel and combine them, you're getting number 3, you're getting the country that is number 3 or number 4 in the world after UK. US, China, and UK, and the 4th is UAE, Israel combination. So that is incredibly complementarity, which needs to be utilized. And so finally, I'm not sure that they figured that they really thought it through, but they are really eager to have Israeli tourists. I don't know how many Israeli tourists you've met, but some of them are not, you may not want to have too many numbers of them as a group, because they may be a bit too loud. But still, in the last 5 months, there have been already, I think, under the lockdowns, there have been 60 or 70,000 Israelis that visited Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the rest of the Emirates. So Israel is looking for long-term partnership. We are not, some people in Israel thought that they will get quick inflow of cash. The Emiratis are much more sophisticated than that. They're interested in investments. They are looking carefully. We're working with some of them, but it will take time until they feel comfortable, and we'll get to engage.
Sounds very promising. Thank you, Professor Kandel. Thank you for that incredibly insightful conversation. We are thrilled and honored to have had the opportunity to speak with you this evening. Thank you to you. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the interpreters. Merci, obrigado, gracias. Please join us on March 21st, just a few days before Israel heads to the polls in its 4th election in 2 years. We're going to have a conversation with Yaakov Katz, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, who will talk with us about the upcoming election. The link to register is in the chat. Thank you, and looking forward to having you join us again soon. Thanks, bye, see you in 2 weeks. And thank you very much, Professor Kandel.
Thank you so much. Was a pleasure.